Welcome to Noir Street, a channel where every story carries a mystery or something even darker. Our community may be small, so please subscribe to the channel. Give this video a like and tell us in the comments which part of the world you're watching from. Now let's begin the story. Chapter 1. Cold enough to kill winter had New York by the throat when the call came in. It wasn't even a polite winter, the kind with pretty flakes drifting down, like it was rehearsed for a magazine cover. This was the raw, ugly sort that comes in sideways and looks for the softest part of your collar. It had been like that for 3 days. Wind off the river. Sidewalks turned to broken glass, and every taxi in Manhattan smelling like wet wool and impatience. I was in the front room on the second floor of the old brownstone on West 35th Street, holding down a chair and pretending to study a page of the morning paper while actually listening for the elevator's hum. You don't live with Nero Wolfe and ignore the little sounds. They mean schedules, and schedules mean you get fed. The elevator did not hum. Instead, the house phone rang. I let it ring twice. That's not manners, that's policy. Fritz Brenner, our chef and general manager of Domestic Harmony, had the phone nearer the kitchen. But Fritz was not fond of winter callers. They usually meant trouble, and trouble had a habit of tracking snow into the hall. On the third ring, I reached for it. Goodwin speaking. A man's voice, clipped and satisfied with itself. Detective Goodwin, this is Inspector Kramer. That told me 2 things. 1, trouble had already taken its coat off. 2, trouble wore a badge and wasn't asking permission. Yes, Inspector, you sound cheerful. Is that because the heat's working down at headquarters? Don't get smart. I'm calling because I've got a thing that's got your boss's name on it, whether he likes it or not. That's a shame, I said. We were planning a quiet day. Orchids, books, and me being underpaid. You can put Wolfe on. That, I told him, is a request, not a law. Why don't you try it as a request? There was a short pause, and I could picture him in his overcoat. Jaw set, hat brim dripping melted snow onto his desk blotter. It warmed my heart. All right, he said. As a request, put Wolfe on. Now you're talking, I said, and called. Wolfe, it's Kramer. Wolfe's voice came from the office door without him appearing. Mr. Goodwin, I am occupied. He was always occupied. It was one of his favorite states. It's the police, I called back. They found something impossible, and they want you to explain it. That did it. Nothing tickles Nero Wolfe's pride like the word impossible used by people who are paid to think. There was a pause. Then the office door opened, and he appeared in the hall in a yellow silk dressing gown that looked like it had never been acquainted with work. He was large enough to make an archway feel narrow and dignified enough to make a dressing gown look like a uniform. He took the receiver from my hand with the slow certainty of a man accepting tribute. Inspector, he said, this is Nero Wolfe. Kramer's voice changed on the line, less clipped, more stubborn. Wolfe, I got a dead man in a locked townhouse. Skull crushed, no weapon in sight. Everybody on the scene says it can't be done. You like that sort of thing? Wolfe's eyes narrowed, which in his case is as close as he gets to leaning forward. You called to exhibit your incompetence. I called because I need your help, and because the commissioner is already calling my captain. The dead man isn't just dead, he's connected. Connected, Wolfe repeated, tasting the word. To whom? Kramer hesitated. That was interesting. If he had the name, he would have thrown it like a brick. Finally, he said, his name's Paul Harkness. I knew that one, not from the society pages. Those don't get tracked in our house unless they include a menu, but from the kind of gossip that drifts through business circles like cigarette smoke. Paul Harkness was a financier, with a reputation for being clever, careful, and cold enough to keep his own office temperature down. He was also the sort of man who didn't die quietly by accident in a locked townhouse. Wolfe grunted. Where is this townhouse? West 21st Chelsea, 4-story. Old brick, renovated in the last year. Harkness bought it and moved in 2 months ago. And the lock, from the inside, deadbolt chain. Windows latched. No sign of entry. We had to force the door to get in. He was in the library on the 2nd floor, nobody else inside. Wolfe's lips twitched faintly, which I have learned means he's already arranging facts in neat stacks and labeling them. And you said, Wolfe murmured, no weapon. None. Not a thing in the room that fits. No fireplace poker missing, no heavy sculpture, no candlestick. His head smashed like it met a hammer, but there's no hammer. It's cold enough in there to keep meat. Wolfe's gaze flicked to me. I could see the question forming without words. Cold enough to keep meat. That's the kind of detail he loves, because it smells like intention. Aloud, he said, "You are describing an absurdity." "It's what we've got," Kramer snapped. "I'm coming over. I want you to listen to it in person." Wolfe's face hardened. "Inspector, I do not receive visitors before." The doorbell rang. It was the kind of timing you don't credit to coincidence unless you're a romantic, and Nero Wolfe is not a romantic, unless you count orchids. Wolfe paused, eyes still on the receiver. Fritz's footsteps sounded from the kitchen, soft, precise. He would open the door because it was his kingdom. But Wolfe's attention had shifted, and I saw it. Trouble was multiplying. Kramer said, "What's that?" Wolfe said, "My doorbell. I suspect, Inspector, that the day is conspiring against me." "I'll be there in 20 minutes, Kramer said, and hung up. Wolfe handed the receiver back to me as if it had offended him. "Archie," he said, "the police are becoming intrusive. Consider it a compliment." I said, "They've got a dead man and no clue, so they called the nearest genius who doesn't leave his house." Wolfe glared. "I leave my house." "Sure," I said, "to go upstairs." Fritz appeared in the hall from the front door. He held a card between thumb and forefinger, like it might carry germs. "A gentleman," Fritz said. His tone suggested the word was on probation. "He insists. He says it is urgent." Wolfe took the card. Read it, and his eyebrows rose a millimeter. That was Wolfe's idea of surprise. He handed the card to me. "Martin Harkness, attorney at Law Harkness and Greeley, elated." I said, "Probably," Wolfe replied. "And urgent, apparently. Mr. Goodwin, you will receive him." "Meme," I said. "That's flattering." "It is practical," Wolfe said. "If he brings snow, you may wipe it from the rug with your personality." He turned toward the dining room, which meant breakfast was not to be disturbed unless the house was on fire. Fritz gave me a brief, sympathetic look. Fritz had seen me between clients and meals before. "It is not pretty." I went down, opened the office door on the first floor, to make sure Wolfe's chair was waiting like a throne, then went to the front room to receive our visitor. Fritz had already admitted him and taken his coat with the efficiency of a man who did not believe in emotional clutter. Martin Harkness stood in our front room as if he would have preferred to stand in a courtroom. He was in his late 30s, lean, with the kind of face that comes from spending years practicing expressions in mirrors. His coat had the look of expensive wool and careful maintenance. His hands were bare and pink from the cold. He kept flexing his fingers like he was trying to wring the winter out of them. He looked at me and made a quick decision. "You're Archie Goodwin, guilty," I said. "And you're Martin Harkness, also guilty of being early. My employer likes his routine." "I don't care about his routine," Harkness said. His voice was tight, controlled. He wasn't panicking. He was too disciplined for that. He was furious, which is sometimes more dangerous. "Most people don't," I told him, "but they learn. Sit down. Tell me why you're here." He didn't sit. "My brother is dead. That's what the police tell me." He flinched. "They called you." "They called Inspector Kramer," I corrected. "He called us. It's how they pretend they're not asking for help." Harkness took a breath. His eyes slid past me toward the closed office door, as if he could sense Wolfe behind it the way a man senses a judge behind a bench. "I need Wolfe," he said. "I need him now." "You and Kramer are forming a club," I said. "Do you have dues?" He ignored that. "Paul's dead in his own house. The police are going to do what they always do. They will find the nearest convenient person and build a story. They will damage my family and my firm." "Families and firms are always getting damaged," I said. sometimes by the family. That got his eyes back on me. What is that supposed to mean? It means, I said pleasantly, that dead brothers are serious business, but so are living ones. If you want Wolfe, you tell me the facts without dressing them up. Why would anyone want Paul Harkness dead? Harkness's jaw clenched. Because Paul was about to expose a theft. I blinked. From his own company. From a fund he managed, Harkness said. A private fund. A small circle, high net worth clients. He discovered that someone with access, had been siphoning money in small amounts for months. That's motive, I said. Now we need opportunity. Who had access? Harkness hesitated, and I knew the answer was going to make his morning worse. 4 people, he said finally. Paul, his assistant, Lila Vaughn, his business partner, Conrad Belling, and the fund's custodian at a bank, Samuel Klein. Nice, I said, a tidy group. And what were you doing in it? I'm his brother, Harkness snapped. And his lawyer. I handled some of the paperwork. So you had access too, I said. His face flushed, but he didn't deny it. He was smart enough to know denial was useless. Paul called me yesterday, he said. He said he had proof. He said he was going to confront the person this morning. He told me to come to his townhouse at 10. What time did you get there? I didn't, Harkness said. His voice dropped. I couldn't court. An emergency motion. I called him at 9:30, and he didn't answer. I assumed he was busy. At 11 I called again. Nothing. At noon I sent my clerk to the townhouse with a message. The clerk called me from the sidewalk. Police everywhere. Then I got the call. What call? From Inspector Kramer, Harkness said. He asked if I knew anything about my brother's business disputes. I told him nothing. Then I came here. To tell Wolfe something, I said, and you just told me. I haven't told you everything, Harkness said. And for the first time he looked as if the cold outside had gotten under his skin. Paul said the proof was in a safe. Yes, Harkness said. A wall safe behind a painting in the library. I made a mental note. A safe behind a painting is the kind of thing a man chooses because he likes stories. What about it? It's gone, Harkness said. Now we were getting somewhere. Gone how? I don't know, he said. But the clerk told me the police were carrying boxes out. Kramer wouldn't say what they found. Paul said the proof was in that safe. If the safe is gone, so is the proof. And if the proof is gone, so is the reason your brother was killed, I said. Harkness exhaled hard. Yes. I glanced toward the office door. Wolfe was probably listening. He could hear a mouse sneeze in the hall if it interfered with his concentration. The question was whether he wanted to involve himself, which depended on whether he smelled an intellectual challenge and a fee. Why come here? I asked. Instead of hiring the best lawyer in New York, Harkness's eyes hardened. Because I am the best lawyer I know, and lawyers don't solve murders. Wolfe does. That's one opinion, I said. Another is that Wolfe solves puzzles when they interest him and refuses everything else. What's your offer? Harkness blinked. Offer, money, I said. Wolfe isn't a civic institution. He's a private practice with expensive tastes. I will pay, Harkness said quickly. Whatever his usual fee is, double if necessary. That was a good start, and I filed it under Winter Miracles. Fine, I said. Now tell me this. Your brother had enemies. Harkness's lips tightened. Paul made them. He was sharp. He cut people when it suited him. That made me look closer. You didn't mention that. He didn't say he was frightened, Harkness corrected. He said, if anything happens to me, it won't be an accident. That's what he said. And then he said, don't trust Conrad. Conrad Belling, I said. Yes, that name had the smooth sound of money and the rough feel of trouble. I could see Wolfe's interest sharpening. Anything else? I asked. Harkness hesitated, then reached into his pocket and drew out a small object wrapped in a handkerchief. He unfolded the cloth carefully and held it out. It was a key, not a normal key, small, flat, with a stamped number on it. The kind you get for a safe deposit box or a private safe. Paul had 2 of these, Harkness said. He gave me one last week, he said. If I call and tell you the number, you go and open it. He never told me the number. I took the key, weighed it. It felt cold, even in my warm hand, as if it had been waiting outside. And you brought it to Wolfe because I think it's connected, Harkness said. Because the police will take it and lose it or misinterpret it. Because my brother is dead, and the person who did it is walking around warm. That's enough for Wolfe to at least listen. Sit down. Try not to look like you're about to sue the furniture. He sat stiffly. I went to the office door, opened it, and stepped inside. Wolfe was at his desk, seated, immense and composed, as if Kramer's call and Harkness's arrival were minor inconveniences. Like a fly in a soup, his eyes were on me, and I knew he had heard every word. Well, he said. Dead brother, I said. Locked townhouse, missing safe proof of theft, warning not to trust the partner, and I held up the key, a little piece of metal that wants attention. Wolfe's eyes flicked to the key. He did not reach for it. Wolfe rarely reaches for anything unless it owes him money. Bring him in, Wolfe said. That was as close as he came to enthusiasm. I went back and escorted Martin Harkness into the office. He walked in as if crossing a line into enemy territory. The office, with its red leather chairs, book-lined walls, and Wolfe's desk like a command post, has that effect on people. It makes them feel judged even before Wolfe speaks. Harkness stopped 3 feet from the desk. Wolfe regarded him as he might regard a specimen brought in from the cold, potentially interesting, certainly inconvenient. Mr. Harkness, Wolfe said, you are an attorney. Therefore you are accustomed to facts. Present them. Harkness glanced at me, then began again more carefully. He told Wolfe what he had told me, plus 1 or 2 legal trimmings that Wolfe ignored. When he produced the key, Wolfe at last extended 2 fingers and accepted it, turning it in the light as if it were a bug pinned to a board. This is not a house key, Wolfe said. No, Harkness said. It's for a safe deposit box or something like it. Perhaps, Wolfe murmured. And you do not know its number. Wolfe's gaze lifted. Mr. Harkness, you have come here because you distrust the police. Yes, justly, Wolfe said. They are often clumsy, however they are persistent. Inspector Kramer has already announced his intention to come here, and when he arrives he will demand my cooperation. Harkness swallowed. Will you cooperate? Wolfe leaned back, steepling his fingers. I will do what I choose. And what do you choose? Harkness pressed. Wolfe's eyes hardened at the pressure, but instead of rebuking him, he asked a question. Mr. Harkness, Wolfe said, why was the house cold enough to keep meat? Harkness blinked. I don't know. Of course you do not, Wolfe said. But you will find out. The cold is not incidental. It is an instrument. Cold preserves. Cold conceals. Cold interferes. He paused, and his voice lowered slightly. Cold, Mr. Harkness, has a way of erasing fingerprints. I felt it then, the first click of a mechanism engaging. Wolfe's mind had found a gear. Harkness stared at him. What does that mean? It means, Wolfe said, that this is not impossible. It is merely unsolved. And it means, since you have offered money, and since the puzzle has the aroma of ingenuity, that I may be persuaded to take an interest. May, Harkness said, and his discipline cracked just a little. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Do not presume. My interest is not for sale like a sandwich at a corner stand. I cleared my throat. If it helps, I told Harkness, that's practically a yes. Wolfe shot me a look of annoyance, mostly for being accurate. Then Fritz appeared at the door, his face calm, his hands folded. Mr. Wolfe, Fritz said, breakfast is served. Wolfe's expression softened, the only softening he allows before noon. Excellent. He turned back to Harkness. Mr. Harkness, you will remain available, Mr. Goodwin will obtain details and make arrangements. If you attempt to manage this yourself, you will only make it worse. Harkness nodded once, stiffly. I understand. Wolfe rose, an event like a ship leaving dock. He headed toward the dining room, already shifting his mind from murder to omelette, with the ease of a man who believes the world should accommodate him. I escorted Harkness out of the office. At the front room, he stopped and looked at me. Do you think he can do it? Wolfe, I said. He can do it if it's possible, and if it's impossible, he'll do it anyway, just to prove the point. Harkness's mouth tightened. And you? I told him, will do the legwork in weather that should be illegal. Outside, a gust of wind slapped the windows, as if New York was trying to get our attention. Inside, somewhere deep in the house, Nero Wolfe was sitting down to breakfast, as if death in Chelsea had no more claim on his schedule than a late delivery of butter. But I knew better. When Wolfe takes an interest, the city can freeze solid and it won't stop him. It only makes the tracks easier to see, if you know where to look. And in a locked townhouse, where a man's skull had been crushed with no weapon in sight, the tracks were going to be strange ones. The doorbell rang again. This time, I didn't need to answer to know who it was. Inspector Kramer had arrived, bringing the cold with him. Chapter 2. The body that lied. By the time Inspector Kramer arrived, the wind had found a new hobby, trying to peel the paint off our front door. Fritz admitted him with the resigned air of a man letting a draft into a warm kitchen. Kramer stomped in, big shoulders hunched, hat brim shining with melted snow, and that expression cops get when they've been told twice in 1 hour that they're wrong. He came into the office without knocking, of course, and stopped short at the sight of Martin Harkness, still occupying one of Wolfe's red leather chairs. Well, Kramer grunted, ain't this cozy? Harkness started to rise. I lifted a hand. Stay put. Standing up for the police is bad for your posture. Kramer glared at me, then looked past us to Wolfe's chair, which was empty because Wolfe was in the dining room doing what he considered the essential work of the morning. Where is he? Kramer demanded. Eating, I said. He's still human in certain narrow respects. Kramer's jaw worked. Get him. I did not move. If you want Wolfe before 11, you either bring him a case worth his digestion, or you wait until he's done. You know the rule. Kramer opened his mouth to argue, then shut it again because he did know the rule, and because arguing with Wolfe's schedule is like trying to arrest the weather. He turned to Harkness. You're Martin Harkness? Yes, Harkness said, voice careful. Kramer's stare tightened. Your brother's dead. Harkness's face didn't change much, but his hands did. His fingers curled against the chair arm as if he wanted to crush it. I know, he said. Kramer's eyes slid to me. You too already have a story. We have facts, I said. You brought the impossibility. He brought the motive. Wolfe will bring the explanation if you don't spoil it first. Kramer snorted. You got nerve. I've been practicing, I said. Before Kramer could reply, the dining room door opened and Wolfe entered, moving with the deliberate certainty of a man who had been assured the world would wait for him. He had changed from his dressing gown into a suit, dark, well cut, and as unhurried as his mind. That meant breakfast had been satisfactory, and the day would now be permitted to exist. He went behind his desk, sat, and looked at Kramer as if the inspector were a newspaper he hadn't asked to receive. Inspector, Wolfe said. You are early and loud, proceed. Kramer stepped forward, pulled a notebook from his coat pocket, and planted himself in front of the desk. All right, here's what we got. Dead man in a locked townhouse on West 21st. I said it was Paul Harkness. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. You said it was Paul Harkness because you were told it was Paul Harkness. Kramer hesitated. That made my eyebrows rise. Hesitation from Kramer is like sunshine in January. It's complicated, he admitted. Wolfe's voice turned colder than the street outside. Nothing is complicated. People are merely reluctant to say what they know. Kramer gave me a look that said he wished reluctance were an arrestable offense. Then he growled, Fine, the man in the library is not Paul Harkness. Harkness half rose. What? Kramer swung toward him. Sit down. Your brother may be missing, not dead. That put a new kind of chill in the room. The first cold had been the winter. This one was the kind that starts in the stomach and crawls upward. Wolfe did not react visibly. He just watched, eyes steady. Explain, he said. Kramer rubbed his jaw. When we forced the front door, we found a man in the library, face down near the radiator. Head trauma. Dead. The place had been kept cold. Thermostat turned low. Windows latched. Curtains drawn. A neighbor said Mr. Harkness was the occupant. That's what the mailboxes say. That's what the deed says. So we assumed it was him. And now you do not, Wolfe said. No, Kramer said. Because the prints don't match. And the dental doesn't match either. The dead guy is Evan Crowley. The name landed with a dull thud. He said it first. The real estate broker? Kramer nodded. Yeah, clean record. Dirty enemies. He's moved properties for some sharp people. He's had threats before, but nothing like this. Harkness was sitting very still. Then where is my brother? Kramer spread his hands. That's what I'm trying to find out. Wolfe's eyes were on Kramer, but his mind was already elsewhere. I could tell by the way his fingers touched each other, lightly, like he was counting invisible beads. You said, Wolfe murmured. Head trauma. Kramer flipped open his notebook. Right, skull crushed. But here's the thing, no weapon, no blunt object that makes sense. No blood spatter the way you'd expect if someone swung something in a room full of books and polished furniture. If he was hit, he wasn't hit there, or not the way we think. Wolfe made a small sound of agreement. And you mentioned a radiator. Yeah, Kramer said. He was near it. There was a puddle of water on the floor, like somebody left a wet umbrella standing there. I looked at Wolfe, because I could see something in his face, that faint sharpening again, like a blade coming out of its sheath. A puddle, Wolfe repeated. Kramer nodded. Just water. We didn't think much of it. Of course you did not, Wolfe said. He leaned back, eyelids lowering. Your training encourages you to notice blood. Not water. I cleared my throat. Inspector, was the radiator leaking? Kramer scowled. We checked. No leak. Pipes are old but solid. The water was clean, no rust, no oil, just water. Wolfe's eyes opened. Water, he said, as if addressing it personally, always comes from somewhere. Harkness stared at him. What does that mean? Somebody spilled a glass. Wolfe's gaze slid to Harkness, and there was no warmth in it. Mr. Harkness, if you spill a glass of water in a library in winter, you do not leave it. You wipe it, unless you wish it to remain. Kramer said, so now the water's a clue. It is always a clue, Wolfe replied. It is merely a question of whether one has the intelligence to respect it. I couldn't resist. Inspector, you're going to start charging Wolfe rent for living in your head. Kramer ignored me. All right, Wolfe, you tell me. How does a guy get his skull crushed with no weapon and no blood spatter? And why is there water by a radiator? Wolfe's mouth tightened. If you are asking me to solve it from that, you are insulting. I'm asking you to come and look, Kramer said, a little too quickly. We need you on the scene. Wolfe's eyes narrowed again. I do not go to crime scenes. Kramer opened his hands, palms up, in the universal police gesture for don't start. This isn't a crime scene. Wolfe, it's a locked townhouse with a missing man and a dead man that isn't the dead man's dead man. If that doesn't make you curious, you're losing your touch. Wolfe's nostrils flared, and I knew Kramer had found the right lever. Pride is Wolfe's most reliable mechanism. Harkness leaned forward. Mr. Wolfe, my brother. Wolfe raised a hand, silencing him without looking. Mr. Goodwin, Wolfe said, you will go. I blinked. Alone. Of course, Wolfe said. I have no intention of freezing in Chelsea because the police are inattentive. You will observe, you will ask questions, and you will return with precise answers. Kramer bristled. I want you, Wolfe. You have Mr. Goodwin, Wolfe said. He is often more effective than I would be in a hostile environment. Besides, His eyes flicked to the key Harkness had brought, lying on Wolfe's desk like a small accusation. "I have other matters requiring thought." Kramer glared, then muttered, "All right, but I'm telling you, this is big. If Paul Harkness is missing and Evan Crowley is dead in his house, somebody's playing games." Wolfe's voice was dry. "Yes, Inspector, and games have rules." Kramer turned to me. "You coming now?" I glanced at Wolfe. "Any instructions besides, don't die?" Wolfe's eyes were on the desk, but his voice was clear. "Yes, find the source of the water." Kramer snorted. "It's winter. There's water everywhere." Wolfe looked up sharply. "Do not be foolish. There is water in the streets. There is not water beside a radiator in a locked library, unless someone put it there." Harkness spoke, his control fraying at the edges. "Do you think my brother is alive?" Wolfe regarded him for a moment, then answered honestly, Wolfe's version of honesty, which is not comforting. "I think," Wolfe said, "that the man you believe to be your brother has arranged for you to believe it." Harkness went pale. Kramer said, "You saying Harkness staged this?" "I am saying," Wolfe replied, "that the identity of the corpse has been manipulated. That manipulation is deliberate. Whether Mr. Harkness is victim or architect remains to be determined." I took my coat from the hall closet, tugged my hat down, and looked at Harkness. "You'll stay here," I said. "Wolfe will keep you under glass like an orchid." Harkness started to protest, but Wolfe's stare stopped it. Kramer and I stepped out into the winter, and the cold hit like a slap. On the ride downtown and over to Chelsea, Kramer filled in what he hadn't said in Wolfe's office. Crowley had enemies, sure, but not the kind who vanish a wall safe and swap bodies in someone else's townhouse. The townhouse itself had been treated like a refrigerator, thermostat down, vents blocked, windows tight, curtains drawn. There were no footprints inside that made sense, no obvious fight, and the dead man's suit was dry except for a damp patch near one knee that might have come from the puddle. When we reached West 21st, the street was half ice, half slush, and the townhouse stood there like it was sulking. 2 uniforms at the door, one plainclothes man smoking hard enough to warm the neighborhood, and a small crowd held back by tape and curiosity. Inside, the air was cold and stale, as if the house itself had been holding its breath. The front hall smelled faintly of varnish and money. "Renovated," Kramer had said, and it showed new wood, new paint, old bones. We went up to the second-floor library, and I stopped in the doorway, because the room was too neat for what had happened. The body lay where Kramer had described, close to the radiator, face turned away, one arm bent under him. The carpet was dark, the furniture expensive, the books arranged with the kind of order that suggests either an obsessive or an interior decorator with a sharp contract. And there on the polished floorboards near the radiator was the puddle. It wasn't big, maybe the size of a dinner plate, but it was too clean, too purposeful. Water on wood isn't innocent. It leaves evidence if it stays. I crouched, careful not to step in it. The radiator was warm to the touch, barely. That surprised me. The house was cold. If the radiator had been running enough to be warm, you'd expect the room to be warmer too. I looked up at the window. It was latched, no draft. Curtains heavy. I looked at the radiator again. And then I saw it, a thin, almost invisible line of moisture on the wall just above the radiator, like a fingerprint, but made of condensation. Not a leak, a trace. Water does come from somewhere. Sometimes it comes from the air, when something cold meets something warm. Sometimes it comes from a block of ice that isn't ice anymore. I straightened and looked at Kramer. "Inspector," I said, "tell your boys not to mop that up." Kramer frowned. "Why?" "Because," I said. "I'm starting to think that puddle isn't what's left behind." He stared at it, then at me. "What is it then?" I took a breath and let the winter air in my lungs do its unpleasant work. "It might be," I said, "what's missing. And in a house where the wrong man was dead and the right man was gone, missing things were the whole point." Chapter 3. A room too tidy, I walked the room again, slower this time. That's the thing about rooms where somebody's died violently. They usually don't cooperate. Chairs get knocked over, tables shift. Lamps fall like they fainted from shock. Even a neat killer leaves a mess because death is untidy business. This room didn't. The library might as well have been staged for a real estate brochure. Chairs squared to the rug, desk blotter centered, books aligned with a precision that suggested either pride or pathology. The only disorder was the body itself, and even that looked placed, not dropped. I didn't touch anything. I didn't need to. You don't handle a lie to know it's lying. Kramer hovered behind me, hands on his hips. You pacing or thinking? Both, I said. Thinking while pacing saves time. I stopped by the desk. No drawers pulled out. No papers scattered. If Evan Crowley or anyone else had been surprised here, he'd had the good manners to be surprised politely. I moved to the chairs. Upholstery smooth. No scuffs on the legs. If there had been a struggle, the furniture had missed it entirely. Inspector, I said, you ever see a man get his skull crushed without throwing a chair? Kramer grunted. I've seen plenty of things I didn't like. I'm not talking about liking, I said. I'm talking about physics. Violence moves objects. This room didn't move. I crossed to the window again, still sealed. No frost inside, which meant the cold had been managed. Not accidental. Curtains thick enough to keep secrets. Then I turned to the thermostat. That was when I frowned. It wasn't low. It was high. Kramer, I said, you told Wolfe the house was kept cold. It was, he said, when we came in. Right now it's set at 74. He leaned in, scowled. Somebody must have changed it. Of course somebody did, I said. But when? He didn't answer, which meant he didn't know. That was fine. Knowing you don't know is the first honest step. I went back to the radiator. Warm now, warmer than before. The puddle was smaller than it had been 20 minutes ago, its edges thinning like it was being erased by patience. That water's disappearing, I said. Kramer stared. So someone wanted it to disappear, I said. Cold first. Heat later. On cue. I straightened and let the picture assemble itself. A cold room preserves things, slows decay, keeps bruising honest, keeps time from moving too fast. Heat, on the other hand, cleans up. Heat dries water. Heat relaxes fibers. Heat encourages disappearance. Inspector, I said, this room's been on a schedule. Kramer's mouth tightened. You saying this wasn't the original setup? I'm saying this room was dressed twice, I replied. Once to keep something intact, once to make something go away. He glanced at the body. Like what? I looked down at Evan Crowley, who was doing an excellent job of staying dead. Like a weapon, I said. Or like evidence that doesn't like warmth. Kramer blew out a breath. Ice. I nodded. Ice fits. Big enough. Shaped right. Swung hard. Ice could do that damage. No blood spray if the surface absorbs it. No weapon left because the weapon melts. Kramer stared at the puddle again. Jesus. Don't bring religion into it, I said. This was engineering. I walked the perimeter once more. Slower still. Counting what wasn't there. No fireplace tools missing. No heavy bookends out of place. No decorative objects large enough to crush bone gone astray. No panic discard. No impulse. Whoever did this hadn't been in a hurry. I stopped by the wall where a painting hung. A tasteful abstract that probably cost more than my yearly lunches. It sat slightly crooked. That annoyed me. I adjusted it. Behind it, flush with the wall, was the outline of a safe empty. Safe's gone, I called. Kramer came over. We know where it went. Number, I stepped back. Then that's the second thing that disappeared on purpose. Kramer's eyes narrowed. Second. Ice melts, I said. Safes don't walk. Somebody planned both exits. I straightened and looked around one last time. Too clean, too careful, too deliberate. The kind of tidy that takes work. I pulled out my notebook, not to write, just to anchor the thought. Summonen had wanted time to pass unnoticed. Someone had wanted something to vanish without leaving a shape behind. Someone had turned Winter into an accomplice. I pictured Wolfe back in his office, sitting like a Buddha with better suits, smiling faintly at the idea of heat, chasing cold like a confession chasing a lie. When I got back to the brownstone, Wolfe was waiting. He didn't ask what I'd seen. He never does. I said it anyway. The room was tidy, I told him. Too tidy. Thermostat. High, now cold before. Ice weapon. Water's the ghost of it. Somebody staged the temperature. Wolfe closed his eyes briefly, satisfied. Yes, he said. Someone wanted something to disappear. And did, I added. Wolfe smiled slightly, the kind of smile that never reaches the eyes, and never means anything good for the person who caused it. Then, he said, our task is simple. I raised an eyebrow. Simple, indeed, Wolfe replied. We must determine what vanished, and who needed it gone badly enough to trust murder to physics. Outside, the winter kept squeezing New York by the throat. Inside, Nero Wolfe had begun to squeeze back. Chapter 4. The convenient alibis if you want to learn about a dead man. You don't start with the body. You start with the people who suddenly have nothing to lose by lying. Wolfe didn't come with me naturally. He never does when there's walking involved. Instead, he sent me out with instructions, a cab fare, and a look that said if you miss something obvious, don't come back. Crowley's inner circle wasn't large. Men like Evan Crowley don't collect friends. They collect obligations, according to Kramer's file, and a few discreet calls from me. The short list came down to 3 people who'd had reason to want him quiet and opportunity to arrange it neatly. First, Daniel Crowley, his business partner. Second, Eleanor Crowley, his sister. Third, Hector Ruiz, building manager of the Chelsea townhouse. I started with the partner. Partners always think they're smarter than the math. Daniel Crowley lived in a glass and steel apartment overlooking the park, the kind of place where everything is visible except the truth. He met me in a living room that smelled faintly of citrus and money. Charity dinner, he said before I even sat down. 7 to 11, I chaired the thing, 50 witnesses, photographs. He smiled the way men do when they believe they've already won. Good cause? I asked. Children's cardiology. Brave of you, I said. Nothing makes a man look innocent like sick kids. His smile stiffened. Are you accusing me? I'm accusing you of rehearsing, I said. Tell me about your brother, partner, he corrected. Tell me about the man who shared your books. Daniel's jaw tightened. Evan was difficult. He pushed deals hard. Sometimes too hard. Hard enough to get killed. He leaned back. Evan made enemies. That's why I insisted on documentation transparency. Funny, I said, because the safe disappeared. He blinked once. Not much, but enough. I don't know anything about a safe, he said. Sure you don't, I said. What time did you leave the dinner? 11. I gave a speech. Anion walk you to your car. Yes, who donors? Names. He supplied them smoothly. I left him there, framed by his windows, looking very clean and very sure of himself. Too sure. Next stop, Eleanor Crowley. She lived uptown in an apartment that smelled of perfume and long held grudges. She wore black, which was appropriate and possibly strategic. I was at the movies, she said, eyes dry. Late showing, alone. Which movie? I asked. She named one, a long one, an alibi that took time seriously. Tickets? I asked. Digital. Concessions. She shook her head. I don't eat popcorn. Witnesses. I was alone. That one I like better. A bad alibi is often more honest than a good one. What was your relationship with your brother? I asked. She laughed. Sharp, bitter. He ruined our father's company and called it progress. He cut me out and called it business. Did you visit him recently? Yes, she said. 2 days ago. Argument? Yes. Threats? She met my eyes. I told him he'd end up alone. I didn't say dead. Fair enough. Last stop. Hector Ruiz, building manager. He was the kind of man who knew everything and admitted nothing. He met me in the lobby, which was clean, warm, and busy enough to make privacy uncomfortable. "I never left the desk," Ruiz said. "Not that night. Camera'll show it." "I believe you," I said. That threw him. "You do?" "Sure," I said. "Nobody kills a man and then sits in a lobby waiting to be remembered." He blinked. "Then why am I here?" "Because you control the building," I said. "Heat access maintenance." He shrugged. "I keep things running." "Did you change the thermostat in Mr. Harkness's townhouse?" "Number, did anyone ask you to?" He hesitated. "People ask for things." "Did Crowley?" "Number." "Did Harkness?" His eyes flicked away just for a second. "Maybe," he said. "About what?" "Heat," Ruiz said. He said the place was too cold. I thanked him and left. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe listened without interruption, fingers steepled, eyes half-lidded. When I finished, he said, "One word." "Convenient." I nodded. "All of them." Wolfe opened his eyes fully. "Mr. Goodwin, real life always leaves scuffs on the floor. Alibis that shine too brightly are polished for inspection." "Which one's lying?" I asked. "All of them," Wolfe said calmly. "But only one is lying well enough to think it matters." I leaned back. "You're going to make me work for that, aren't you?" "Of course," Wolfe said. "If you did not work, you would become lazy." Wolfe reached for the telephone. "Inspector Kramer will return." I frowned. "To arrest somebody?" "No," Wolfe said. "To be educated." Outside, the city kept moving, people slipping on ice and pretending it wasn't happening. Inside, Nero Wolfe had begun to count the scuffs. Chapter 5. Ice on the ledge. I went back to Chelsea, because Wolfe had asked a question that doesn't sound like a question until you understand Nero Wolfe. How fast did the heat come on? You don't ask that unless you already know the answer matters. The street looked different in daylight. Night hides things. Morning underlines them. The cold had sharpened overnight, one of those drops where the city seems to contract, metal creaking, breath turning instantly visible. I stood across the street from the townhouse and looked up. That's when I saw them. Icicles, not the polite little glass fangs you see on brownstones trying to look picturesque. These were thick, heavy, opaque, and long enough to do real damage if gravity got ideas. They hung from the stone ledge beneath the second-floor library window, lined up in a row, except one space. The gap was clean, too clean. The rest hung there like teeth, with one knocked out in a bar fight. I took my time crossing, nodding to the uniform on the door, and craned my neck again from directly below. The icicles hadn't formed overnight. They were layered, built from repeated melt and freeze cycles. That meant heat inside, cold outside, and patience. And one was gone. Inside, Kramer met me at the foot of the stairs. He looked tired, which was a good sign. Tired cops start thinking sideways. "You back again," he said. "Miss me?" "No," he said. "What now?" "Heating." "Specifically, when it was turned down, when it was turned up, and who touched it?" He scowled. "You think that's the weapon?" "I think it's the handle," I said. "The weapon already melted." Upstairs, I checked the window from inside. No marks, no cracks. The latch undisturbed. Whoever took the icicle hadn't broken in. They hadn't needed to. I stepped back, visualizing it. Cold room, window sealed. Heat inside low, but not off. Just enough to create slow melt along the exterior ledge. Water drips, freezes, grows, icicle after icicle, fattening quietly while the city sleeps. Then, at the right time, someone opens the window just enough. Takes one, closes it again. No marks. No witnesses, no noise louder than winter itself. Kramer came back with the logs. I read them twice. The thermostat had been turned down sharply at 8:40 p.m., then turned up at 9:55. Crowley's estimated time of death, between 9:10 and 9:30. That was my answer. I went back to the brownstone with cold in my bones and a neat picture in my head. Wolfe was at his desk, hands folded, eyes expectant without appearing so. I didn't waste time. "Icicles," I said. "Yes," Wolfe replied. "I assumed as much." One was missing. The rest were thick enough to do the job, outside the library window, formed over days, taken the night of the murder. Wolfe nodded once. "And the heat?" "Turned back on less than an hour later," I said. "Fast enough to melt the evidence, slow enough not to raise suspicion." Wolfe closed his eyes briefly, as if savoring a familiar taste. "Elegant," he said. "Contemptibly elegant." "Whoever did it," I said. "Planned for physics. Not panic. No struggle because there was no fight. Crowley was probably seated, maybe arguing, maybe listening, or," Wolfe added, "expecting someone he trusted." I grimaced. "That narrows it." "Indeed," Wolfe said. "Now consider the alibis again, Archie, but this time consider location. Building manager in the lobby." Wolfe's eyes opened. "Which of them could access the window without leaving the building?" I didn't answer immediately. I didn't have to. "Ruiz," I said finally. "Maintenance access, fire escape roof." "And who," Wolfe continued, "knew enough to time the heat?" I hesitated. Summoner who'd already argued about it. Wolfe's mouth curved slightly. "Mr. Harkness." That landed hard. "You think Harkness killed Crowley?" I asked. "No," Wolfe said calmly. "I think Mr. Harkness arranged for Crowley to die in his place." I stared. "That's a hell of a sentence." "It is also," Wolfe said, "the correct one." I ran a hand through my hair. "So Crowley was lured there, killed with an icicle, placed as a substitute corpse, and Harkness vanished." "Yes, and the safe contained proof," Wolfe said, "which Mr. Harkness removed before arranging his own disappearance." I leaned back. "So the missing man isn't a victim?" "No," Wolfe said. "He is the architect." I exhaled slowly. "Then why come to us?" Wolfe's eyes sharpened. "Because arrogance always requires an audience." The phone rang. Wolfe reached for it without haste. "Inspector Kramer," he said. "You may assemble everyone." Kramer's voice crackled faintly through the receiver. "For what?" "For the truth," Wolfe said, "before the last icicle melts." Chapter 6. The melted weapon. Inspector Kramer arrived with the air of a man who had been told the answer to a riddle and didn't like what it said about him. He brought the usual accessories: grim face, notebook, and a lieutenant who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. But this time he also brought the principals. Daniel Crowley came in stiff, backed and offended. Eleanor Crowley arrived wrapped in dignity and perfume. Hector Ruiz trailed behind them, expression guarded, hands jammed in his coat pockets as if he were afraid they might betray him. Martin Harkness was already there, seated where Wolfe had left him, looking like a man waiting for a verdict he expected to appeal. Wolfe surveyed them all from behind his desk with mild distaste, like a chef inspecting inferior produce. "Sit," Wolfe said. They sat. Even Kramer sat, though he didn't like it. Wolfe folded his hands. "We will proceed efficiently. Inspector," the murder weapon was an icicle. There it was, dropped without ceremony. Daniel Crowley snorted. Eleanor blinked. Ruiz stiffened. Harkness said nothing. Kramer growled. "You better explain that, Wolfe." "Of course," Wolfe said mildly. "An icicle is silent. It leaves no metallic residue. It absorbs blood rather than scattering it. When its task is complete, it dissolves obediently without complaint." He turned slightly toward me. "Mr. Goodwin." "Outside the second-floor library window," I said. "There were multiple icicles. Thick ones, one was missing. The heat inside the house had been turned down to allow them to form, then turned up after the estimated time of death to erase the remains." Daniel Crowley scoffed. "This is absurd." "On the contrary," Wolfe replied, "it is economical." He leaned forward a fraction, eyes fixed on the group. The blow would have been sufficient to crush the skull. The victim would have collapsed immediately, no struggle, no disorder. The icicle, now cracked and bloodied, would then melt, leaving only a puddle of water, which the subsequent increase in temperature would eliminate. The radiator, I added, wasn't for comfort. It was for cleanup. Eleanor Crowley's lips parted. "You're saying my brother—" "I am saying," Wolfe interrupted, "that your brother was not the intended victim. That did it." Harkness stood up so fast his chair scraped. "Then, where is Paul?" Wolfe regarded him calmly. "Alive, I imagine, and listening, metaphorically speaking." Harkness stared. "You think I killed Crowley?" "No," Wolfe said. "I think you arranged for him to be killed." Silence fell, thick enough to trip over. Wolfe continued, voice even. "Mr. Harkness, you had motive. Crowley was entangled in the same financial matters you were manipulating. He knew too much, or knew enough to be useful as a substitute." "That's insane," Harkness snapped. "Why would I want a man dead in my house?" "To convince the police you were dead," Wolfe replied, "and to gain time." Kramer leaned forward. "Time for what?" "To remove the safe," Wolfe said. "To destroy or conceal the proof of theft, to vanish." Daniel Crowley shook his head. "This is fantasy." "Is it?" Wolfe asked. "Then explain the thermostat adjustments, explain the icicle. Explain why Mr. Ruiz," his eyes shifted, "was asked to adjust the heat that night." All eyes went to Ruiz. Ruiz swallowed. "I didn't know." "You knew enough," Wolfe said. "You were asked to make the house cold, then warm. You did so. You were paid." Ruiz's face went gray. "I didn't kill anyone." "No," Wolfe agreed. "You facilitated." Kramer slammed a hand on his knee. "And Crowley?" Wolfe's gaze returned to Harkness. "Crowley was lured to the townhouse under false pretenses. A business meeting. A confrontation. He expected negotiation, not execution." "That's a lie," Harkness said hoarsely. "Then answer this," Wolfe said quietly. "Why did your brother give you a key to a safe he never intended you to open?" Harkness froze. Wolfe went on. "You wanted that key found. You wanted us to believe there was still a mystery to solve, still a reason to look for you as a victim rather than a suspect. You underestimated one thing." Harkness's voice was thin. "What?" Wolfe's eyes hardened. "Cold." I leaned forward. "You can fake a death," I said. "You can steal a safe, but you can't make Winter forget what it did." Harkness sagged back into his chair. Kramer stood. "Where is Paul Harkness?" Wolfe answered before Harkness could. "Not far. He will not travel while he believes himself clever. He will be monitoring developments, waiting for confirmation that his plan succeeded." "And how do we get him?" Kramer demanded. Wolfe smiled faintly. "By informing him that it has failed." He reached for the phone. "Inspector," Wolfe said, dialing. "Issue a bulletin. Paul Harkness is wanted, not missing. His body was never found because it was never there." He hung up and looked at Harkness, who now looked very small. "Cold commits the crime," Wolfe said. "Heat hides it, but neither can erase logic." Outside, somewhere in the city, ice was melting. Inside, the truth had already set. Chapter 7. The building manager's hands. If Wolfe has a talent beyond deduction, it's patience. He can wait the way a spider waits, motionless, certain, and entirely uninterested in false movement. I watched Hector Ruiz. He sat stiffly in the red leather chair, shoulders hunched, eyes darting just enough to be noticeable. He hadn't spoken since Wolfe dismantled the icicle theory and laid it on the desk like a finished puzzle. He didn't need to. His hands were doing all the talking. Ruiz kept rubbing his fingers together, not nervously, not the quick, fidgety kind of motion you get from a man afraid of being accused. This was slower, methodical, as if he were trying to warm something that remembered being hurt. Ice burns like fire when you hold it too long. I leaned back and watched. So did Wolfe, though he made it look like he was contemplating the grain of his desktop. Kramer broke the silence. "Ruiz, you said you found the body." Ruiz nodded. "Yes, I went up after the thermostat alert." "What alert?" I asked. The system logs extreme changes, Ruiz said. Temperature dropped too fast. Then later, rose. Too fast. Funny, I said. You didn't mention that before. He swallowed. You didn't ask. Wolfe spoke at last. Mr. Ruiz, when you entered the library, how long had the victim been dead? Ruiz blinked. I don't know. Minutes. Minutes. Wolfe repeated. Yet when Mr. Goodwin observed your gloves, he gestured slightly toward the coat draped over Ruiz's chair. They were wet. Ruiz's head snapped up. It was snowing. Yes, Wolfe said calmly. Outside, not inside. Kramer reached over and picked up the gloves. Dark wool, damp at the fingertips, not the cuffs. Explain that, Kramer said. Ruiz licked his lips. I touched the radiator. You did not, Wolfe said. Ruiz stared at him. You rubbed your fingers as if they were burned. Wolfe went on. Not chilled, burned. Ice burns, heat soothes. That is why you adjusted the thermostat upward immediately after. Ruiz's shoulders slumped, just a little enough. I leaned forward. You carried it, didn't you? Ruiz whispered. I didn't want to. Carried what? Kramer demanded. The icicle, I said. From the ledge to the room barehanded. Because gloves would leave fibers. You held it too long. It hurt. You panicked. Ruiz shook his head. He said it would be quick. Wolfe adjusted his chair an inch, an almost invisible movement, but deliberate. He was settling in. Wolfe said softly, Is Mr. Harkness? Ruiz closed his eyes. He told me it was just a scare, Ruiz said hoarsely. He said Crowley would confess, that I'd just need to stand by. But Crowley didn't confess, I said. No, Ruiz said. He laughed. Silence again. Kramer's voice was rough. So you struck him. Ruiz shook his head violently. Number. I handed it to Harkness. I swear, he did it. Wolfe nodded once. That is consistent. Harkness leapt to his feet. He's lying. Wolfe didn't look at him. Sit down, Mr. Harkness. You are finished directing this drama. Ruiz continued, words spilling now. Harkness said the cold would take care of everything, that the ice would melt, that the body would be mistaken for him. He said he'd already arranged the dental confusion. That part, Wolfe said, was clever, too clever. Kramer stared. Dental confusion. I supplied it. Crowley had recent dental work done by the same clinic Harkness used, same records, same x-rays. A switch would pass initial checks. Kramer cursed softly. Ruiz looked up. I didn't kill him. No, Wolfe said. You assisted. You handled the weapon. You altered the environment. You lied. Ruiz sagged. I just managed the buildings, Wolfe said. Are instruments like any other in the wrong hands. They become weapons. Kramer stood. You're coming with us, Ruiz. As Ruiz was led out, hands cuffed, I watched his hands one last time. He had stopped rubbing them. They were warm now. Harkness remained standing, pale, eyes bright, with fury and fear. You have no proof, he said. No body, no weapon. Wolfe finally looked at him. We have time, Wolfe said, and we have arrogance, yours. Harkness sneered. I'm still alive. Yes, Wolfe agreed. Which means you will make one final mistake. He leaned back, folded his hands and waited. And when Nero Wolfe waits, the world usually obliges him by doing something foolish. Chapter 8. The broken timeline. Wolfe did not raise his voice. He never does when he has reached the point where the facts arrange themselves without assistance. Volume is for persuasion. Wolfe prefers inevitability. The office was quiet in the particular way it gets when everyone present understands. Perhaps dimly, perhaps too late, that the story they've been telling themselves has already collapsed. Inspector Kramer stood near the desk, arms folded, jaw tight. Daniel Crowley sat stiffly, hands clasped between his knees. Eleanor Crowley stared at the carpet, as if it might open and take her with it. Hector Ruiz had been removed, but his absence lingered like a bad smell. Martin Harkness remained standing, rigid, as though refusing to sit might keep the net from closing. Wolfe adjusted himself in his chair by perhaps half an inch. That movement alone told me we were entering the final phase. The error in this case, Wolfe began calmly, was not the presence of lies. Lies are common. They are the grease on which society's machinery often runs. The error was structural. Kramer shifted his weight. Structural how? In the same way, Wolfe replied, that a building fails not because of loose paint, but because of a compromised beam. He looked first at Ruiz's empty chair. Mr. Ruiz's lie was practical, Wolfe said. He claimed he merely discovered the body. In truth, he enabled the crime. He controlled access, heating, and timing. His lie failed because it relied on human endurance. Hands cannot hold ice without consequence. Wolfe's eyes moved to Daniel Crowley. Your lie, Wolfe said, was social, a charity dinner, public, documented, virtuous. You relied on witnesses. Unfortunately, witnesses remember what they are meant to remember. Daniel shifted. I was there. Yes, Wolfe agreed, until 9:15 after that. You were not. You escorted a donor outside, left early, and returned home. You did not kill your partner, but you were not as absent as you wished to appear. Daniel opened his mouth, then closed it. He had realized that denial would only sharpen the blade. Wolfe turned next to Eleanor. Your lie was emotional, Wolfe said, voice softening only slightly. You bought a ticket. You intended to go to the cinema, but intention is not action. Eleanor's shoulders trembled. You stood outside your brother's townhouse that night, Wolfe continued. You did not enter. You left. Your phone betrayed you, not because you were careless, but because grief is rarely tidy, Eleanor whispered. I just wanted to see him. I know, Wolfe said, and that is why your lie does not concern us further. Finally, Wolfe turned his full attention to Martin Harkness. The air changed. It always does when Wolfe fixes someone directly. Your lie, Wolfe said, was not social, emotional, or practical. It was mechanical. Harkness laughed sharply. You're improvising. No, Wolfe replied. I am reconstructing. He folded his hands and spoke with the patience of a man explaining a blueprint. You required a specific sequence of events. Crowley had to be lured to the townhouse. The room had to be cold enough to preserve the weapon's form. The murder had to occur within a narrow window. The heat then had to be raised, soon enough to erase the weapon, but not so soon as to alert suspicion. Wolfe paused. You needed time to remove the wall safe. Time to ensure the corpse would be misidentified. Time to vanish convincingly. Kramer nodded slowly. The timeline never quite lined up. Because it was designed not to, Wolfe said. You declared yourself missing too early, Mr. Harkness, before the environment had completed its task. Harkness's jaw tightened. There's no proof I was there. There is, Wolfe said, but it is not the sort you can cross-examine. He leaned forward slightly. Only one lie in this case depended on melting time. Silence spread outward from that sentence. Witnesses can forget, Wolfe continued. Receipts can be forged. Phone records can be obscured. But ice obeys only temperature. You built your alibi around physics, not people, I added quietly. Cold first. Heat later. On cue. That was the schedule. Wolfe inclined his head in agreement. If you had been anywhere else, Wolfe said, the icicle would not have melted completely. The water would have remained. The deception would have failed. Your absence was not merely convenient. It was required. Harkness shook his head, but the motion lacked conviction. Circumstantial, he said. Entirely, Wolfe agreed. And therefore inescapable. Circumstances are not opinions. They are conditions. Harkness's eyes flicked, just once, to the clock on Wolfe's wall. Wolfe saw it. Time, Wolfe said gently, is what you believed you controlled. In truth, it controlled you. Kramer straightened. We can hold him. On what? Harkness demanded. Murder. Kramer said. Conspiracy. Evidence tampering. Wolfe added calmly, and the arrogance of assuming Winter could be rushed. Harkness said nothing more. There was nothing left that fit. Wolfe leaned back, his work complete. The timeline, he said, was broken deliberately, and only one man benefited from every fracture. No one spoke. Outside, the city moved on, buses hissing, boots slipping, ice surrendering inch by inch to the heat. Inside, the truth had finished melting, leaving nothing behind that could be wiped away. Chapter 9. Motive in the basement. Nero Wolfe dislikes basements. He has explained this to me more than once, usually while remaining several floors above one. Basements offend his sense of order. They are places where pipes sweat, dust settles, and mistakes are stored instead of corrected. Nothing elegant ever begins in a basement, Wolfe says, though quite a lot ends there, which is why he sent me. Go, Wolfe said, waving a dismissive hand as if shooing an unpleasant thought. The motive will be below ground, it always is. You will find it where the numbers are hidden and the air is stale. So I went. The Chelsea townhouse had settled into a strange afterlife. The uniforms were gone, replaced by plain clothes, men who nodded at me with professional boredom. The lobby was warm now, almost too warm, as if the building were embarrassed by how cold it had been made to behave. I took the narrow concrete stairs down to the basement. Each step sounded louder than it should have. The walls were painted an institutional grey, chipped and scarred in places where things had been dragged or dropped or slammed in anger. The smell hit halfway down: oil, dust, damp concrete, and the faint metallic tang of hot pipes cooling too slowly. If truth ever had a scent, this would be close. Hector Ruiz's domain was immaculate. That was the first thing that struck me. Boilers polished, pipes labeled with neat tags, electrical panels aligned and locked. The maintenance office itself sat off to one side like a confession booth. Small, functional, and private. A steel desk, 2 filing cabinets, a chair with a torn armrest, and a wall safe bolted directly into concrete. The kind of safe that never held anything glamorous, just paper ledgers, records that told stories no one wanted read aloud. Inspector Kramer was already there, jacket off, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened as if the basement air had demanded a little honesty from him. You were right, he said without preamble. I usually am, I replied. Which part of right? He handed me a thick folder, maintenance accounts. This building and 3 others Crowley owned small withdrawals, regular years back. I opened the folder and felt a professional admiration that had nothing to do with morality. It was beautiful in the ugliest possible way. Quiet theft, careful math, the sort of embezzlement that doesn't shout, doesn't stumble, doesn't leave fingerprints. Replacement parts billed but never installed. Emergency repairs charged twice. Routine services inflated by a few dollars at a time. Nothing large enough to trigger audits. Everything small enough to pass as noise, unless you were trained to hear silence. Crowley audited everything himself, Kramer said. Didn't trust software, pencil, and paper guy. That's why he caught it, I said, and why he didn't tell anyone right away. Kramer nodded. He confronted Ruiz down here, privately. No witnesses, no raised voices. I could see it. Crowley standing exactly where I was standing now. Coat still on, hat in hand, ledger open, calm, controlled, not accusatory. Crowley wasn't that kind, just precise. These numbers don't work. Ruiz across from him, realizing the math had finally caught up. Years of careful skimming, suddenly exposed by one man with time, patience, and a taste for order. Ruiz must have tried reason first. They always do. I can fix it. Crowley, unmoved. You can't, and you won't. That's when panic arrives, not loudly, not dramatically. Panic doesn't throw chairs. Panic narrows options until only one looks like survival. Kramer flipped another page. Ruiz admitted. Crowley said he was going to the police. Of course he was, I said. Crowley believed in process. That was his fatal flaw. I closed the folder and leaned against the desk, letting the room speak. The basement explained the motive. But the library upstairs explained the method. Crowley hadn't come to the townhouse expecting violence. He'd come expecting resolution, maybe even gratitude. He believed exposure would end the problem cleanly. What he didn't understand was that the theft wasn't just Ruiz's. The maintenance accounts were camouflage. They hid more than petty embezzlement. They hid a structure, one designed by a man who understood finance far better than plumbing. Paul Harkness. Crowley had trusted him, shared his findings, asked for advice. That was the moment the case turned lethal. Harkness saw what Ruiz saw, but faster. He understood that Crowley wasn't just a threat. He was an opportunity. A man who frequented the townhouse, a man of similar build, a man whose dental records could be arranged. The icicles had already been forming. The thermostat had already been lowered weeks earlier, under the excuse of efficiency. The building itself had been quietly prepared. Opportunity doesn't always knock. Sometimes it freezes. I went back upstairs and stood once more in the library. The room felt smaller now, stripped of drama and police tape. But the memory of it lingered. I imagined Crowley seated, perhaps irritated, perhaps confident. Ruiz nearby, sweating despite the cold. Harkness arriving later, calm, reassuring, decisive. No shouting, no struggle. Just a decision made in a narrow window of time, an icicle taken from the ledge, a single brutal motion, panic giving way to obedience as the plan took over. Cold first, heat later. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe listened without interruption as I laid it out in full. He sat perfectly still, eyes half-lidded, absorbing every detail as if fitting the final stones into a mosaic. The money went through maintenance, I said. Years of it. Crowley found it, confronted Ruiz privately. That created the opening. Harkness turned it into a solution. Wolfe nodded once. Motive, he said. At last. Ruiz panicked, I added. Harkness planned. An essential distinction, Wolfe said. Panic commits crimes. Planning explains them. I hesitated. Crowley died because he believed the truth would be enough. Yes, Wolfe said softly. Many intelligent men make that error. I thought again of the basement, the ledgers, the quiet theft, the silence that followed discovery, and the icicle. I asked. Wolfe opened his eyes fully, was merely waiting, like winter itself. Outside, the city groaned under another drop in temperature, unaware that winter's usefulness was nearly exhausted. Only one chapter remained. And Nero Wolfe was already preparing to end it. Chapter 10. The test. Wolfe never ran Nero. Wolfe has no use for experiments. This confuses people. They expect him to demand demonstrations, reconstructions, elaborate proofs involving tape measures and stopwatches. They imagine him recreating the crime with theatrical precision, as if truth requires rehearsal. It does not. What Wolfe needs, what he has always relied upon, is memory. The office was full again, as Wolfe prefers it at the end. Inspector Kramer stood by the desk, hat in hand. Martin Harkness sat rigidly in the red leather chair, spine straight, face carefully blank. Daniel Crowley and Eleanor Crowley occupied the remaining seats, silent now, the way people get when the last excuses have been used up. Wolfe regarded them all with detached interest. Inspector, Wolfe said, you requested a final confirmation. You will not receive a test. Kramer frowned. You don't want to prove it. I have proved it, Wolfe replied. To myself, that is sufficient. Kramer opened his mouth, then closed it again. He had learned, over the years, that Wolfe's confidence was not bravado. It was bookkeeping. Harkness laughed softly. So that's it. No demonstration, no experiment with ice and timing. You expect a jury to convict on your memory? Wolfe turned his head slowly and fixed Harkness with a look that was neither angry nor triumphant, only precise. Yes, Wolfe said, because I have seen this before. That landed, years ago, Wolfe continued. Another winter, another man convinced himself he was clever. He used cold as an accomplice and heat as an eraser. The weapon vanished. The room lied. The murderer relied on novelty. Wolfe's voice was calm, almost reflective. He was wrong then, as you are now. Harkness's smile faltered. Coincidence? No, Wolfe said. Repetition. I leaned forward. Criminals repeat what works, I said, especially the arrogant ones. You believed, Wolfe went on, that because the weapon dissolved, the crime itself would do the same. You believed novelty would distract from logic. You were mistaken on both counts. Kramer shifted. What ties it together, Wolfe, for the record? For the record, Wolfe said. Time. He steepled his fingers. You required a precise sequence, cold enough to grow the icicle. A private confrontation, a single blow, immediate collapse. Heat raised at the correct interval to destroy the weapon and dry the evidence. Removal of the safe, then disappearance. Wolfe's eyes never left Harkness. You could not accelerate any part of it. You could not delegate the critical moments. The plan depended upon your presence. Harkness shook his head. You can't prove where I was. Wolfe's voice hardened a fraction. On the contrary, I can prove where you were not. Silence again. You were not at liberty, Wolfe said. You were not traveling. You were not observed. You were waiting, watching the temperature change, counting minutes, trusting physics. Wolfe leaned back. That is the test I never ran, he said. I did not need to, I remembered. Kramer exhaled slowly. The truth survives even when the weapon doesn't. Wolfe nodded, precisely. Harkness stood abruptly. This is absurd. You have theories, circumstances. No ice. No body of proof. Wolfe looked almost bored now. Mr. Harkness, he said, you have confused evidence with artifacts. Evidence is not always tangible. Sometimes it is structural, sometimes it is temporal, and sometimes, his eyes sharpened, it is psychological. Harkness froze. You returned here, Wolfe said, because you needed confirmation. You needed to know whether your plan had succeeded. That need is your final mistake. Kramer stepped forward. There's a warrant coming for you, Harkness. Don't make me chase you. Harkness did not resist. He did not argue. He simply looked at Wolfe with something like disbelief. You never tested it, he said. The ice, the timing. No, Wolfe said, because criminals repeat what works, and I repeat what I remember. Harkness backed toward the door, eyes fixed on Wolfe, then turned and left before Kramer could put a hand on him. By the time Kramer had men on the stoop, Harkness had already slipped into the city. The door closed behind him with a soft, final click. Daniel Crowley stood slowly. Martin didn't deserve that. No, Wolfe said. He deserved better judgment. Eleanor Crowley wiped her eyes and left without speaking. When the room was empty at last, Wolfe leaned back, closed his eyes, and let out a breath that was almost contented. I stood, stretching. Nice ending, I said. Cleanliness, Wolfe replied, is not the point. What is? Completion. Fritz appeared at the door. Mr. Wolfe, dinner is ready. Wolfe smiled faintly, already turning his attention to more civilized matters. Outside, winter loosened its grip on New York, ice dripping quietly into gutters, weapons dissolving into nothing. Inside, the truth remained, intact, logical, and entirely unmelted, just the way Nero Wolfe prefers it. Chapter 11. The Collapse. Hector Ruiz lasted longer than I expected. Not long in an absolute sense. No man does once Nero Wolfe begins tightening the structure, but longer than most men who have spent years believing numbers and systems will protect them. Ruiz had leaned on routine his entire life. Routine had fed him, hidden him, and finally betrayed him. He was brought back to Wolfe's office 2 days later under guard, alone this time, except for Wolfe, Inspector Kramer, and me. No partner, no sister, no audience, just 4 walls, a desk, and the accumulated weight of things that refused to stay buried. Ruiz sat stiffly, his hands folded in his lap. He had stopped rubbing them now. That in itself told me everything. The pain had gone, but the memory hadn't. Wolfe regarded him without haste. Mr. Ruiz, Wolfe said, you have maintained your innocence by leaning heavily on an alibi. Ruiz nodded quickly. I was in the lobby. Cameras prove it. Yes, Wolfe said. They do. Ruiz's shoulders relaxed, just a fraction. It was the wrong reaction. But alibis, Wolfe continued calmly, are like crutches, useful only while the leg beneath them holds. Ruiz frowned. I don't understand. You will, Wolfe said. Inspector. Kramer opened his folder and spread the prepared documents on Wolfe's desk. Heating logs, weather reports, maintenance schedules, time-stamped, cross-referenced, and unforgiving. Wolfe did not look at them immediately. He never does. He prefers to let the evidence wait, the way truth always does. You claim, Wolfe said, that you never left the lobby between 8:30 and 10:30 on the night Mr. Crowley died. Yes, Ruiz said. Never. Very well, Wolfe said. Let us assume that to be true. Ruiz nodded again, encouraged. Now, Wolfe went on, the heating logs indicate that the thermostat in the townhouse was lowered sharply at 8:40. I didn't do that, Ruiz said quickly. Indeed, Wolfe replied. The system allows remote adjustment from the maintenance terminal, which is located where, Mr. Ruiz? In the basement, Ruiz said. And in the lobby, Wolfe added. At your desk. Ruiz swallowed. Next, Wolfe said. The outside temperature at 8:40 was 19 degrees, ideal for icicle formation, given a warm interior surface. Ruiz said nothing. At 9:55, Wolfe continued, the heat was raised abruptly again, remotely again from your station. Ruiz's jaw tightened. That proves nothing. It proves, Wolfe said, that you controlled the environment. He leaned forward slightly. Now let us consider the missing icicle. Ruiz's eyes flicked up. There were several, Wolfe said. Thick, heavy, one missing. Removed between 8:45 and 9:30. During that window, Mr. Crowley was killed. Ruiz shook his head. Anion could have taken it. No, Wolfe said. Only someone with access, knowledge, and reason. Kramer spoke for the first time. Weather records show no wind strong enough to break it. No thaw, no accident. Ruiz's breathing had changed. Shorter now, shallower, Wolfe continued, relentless but unhurried. You insist you remained in the lobby. Very well, let us accept that. Then you did not kill Mr. Crowley. But, Wolfe said, you facilitated his death. Ruiz stiffened. You adjusted the temperature to allow the weapon to form. You adjusted it again to destroy the weapon. You provided access and timing. Whether you struck the blow or handed the icicle to another is immaterial. Ruiz shook his head. I didn't mean. Meaning, Wolfe said sharply, is irrelevant. He gestured toward the documents at last. These records lock together cleanly. The heating logs, the weather, the missing icicle. Each alone might be dismissed. Together, they are structural. Ruiz's voice trembled. I was just following instructions. Yes, Wolfe said. That is always the defense of the man who believes systems absolve him. Kramer leaned forward. Who gave you the instructions? Ruiz hesitated. Wolfe watched him patiently. He had already kicked the crutch away. Now he was waiting for gravity to do its work. Ruiz's shoulders sagged. Harkness, he whispered. There it was. He said it would be clean, Ruiz said, words spilling now. He said the cold would do the work, that there'd be nothing left. Wolfe nodded once. Cold does not work alone. Ruiz looked up, eyes wet. I didn't think it would. You did, Wolfe said. You simply chose not to follow the thought to its conclusion. Ruiz broke then, not loudly, not dramatically, just a quiet collapse inward, like a building whose supports have finally been removed. I held it, he said. Just for a second it burned. I didn't think ice could burn. Ice does not lie, Wolfe said calmly. People do. Kramer stood. That's enough. As Ruiz was led out, hands cuffed, I watched him carefully. He did not resist. He did not argue. He simply walked, shoulders bent, finally aware that the cold he had trusted had turned on him. When the door closed, Wolfe leaned back. "The collapse," Wolfe said, "was inevitable." I nodded. He trusted the system. He trusted Winter, Wolfe replied. A grave error. Outside, the city continued its slow thaw inside. Another structure had fallen, cleanly, logically, and beyond repair. And Nero Wolfe, having removed one more lie from its place, turned his attention to matters that could still be controlled. Chapter 12. What the code leaves behind the case ended the way most of Wolfe's cases do. Quietly, there was no dramatic confession shouted into the night, no sudden discovery of a blood-stained object triumphantly held aloft. There was no weapon produced, because there never had been one in the ordinary sense. No blood trail to trace. No reenactment staged for the benefit of men who needed pictures to understand logic. The paperwork moved instead. Slow, relentless, and final warrants. Statements, charges amended and clarified. Hector Ruiz agreed to cooperate early. He had discovered, as many men do too late, that cooperation feels like relief only because resistance has become unbearable. Paul Harkness was found 3 days later in a rented room in Albany, watching the news with the detached curiosity of a man still hoping reality might change its mind. It did not. When Inspector Kramer came by with the final confirmations, Wolfe listened without comment, nodding once at the appropriate moments. When Kramer finished, Wolfe said only, "Good," as if the inspector had reported the successful delivery of groceries. "There's still no weapon," Kramer said, almost grudgingly. Wolfe looked at him over steepled fingers. "There never was." Kramer shook his head. "A jury's going to have to understand that." "They will," Wolfe replied calmly, "because the truth does not require props." Kramer studied him for a moment, then sighed. "You ever get tired of being right?" "No," Wolfe said. "I get tired of being interrupted." That was dismissal enough. Kramer left with the faintest trace of a smile he would deny having later. The house settled back into its proper rhythms. Wolfe returned upstairs to his orchids, as if he had never left them. The greenhouse welcomed him the way it always did, warm, humid, and orderly. He spent an hour among the plants, adjusting pots, inspecting leaves, restoring balance to a world that responded gratefully to logic and care. I stayed below, poured milk into a glass, and shut the front window tight. Winter had loosened its grip, but not enough to be trusted. The city outside was wet now instead of frozen, gutters carrying away the remains of what had seemed permanent only days earlier. Across the street, the last icicles clung stubbornly to the stone ledge of the Chelsea townhouse. They dripped slowly, steadily, each drop marking time far more honestly than any alibi ever could. I watched one fall. It shattered on the pavement, meaningless and harmless at last. When Wolfe came down for lunch, he was in a better mood than usual, which is to say, he was marginally less dissatisfied with the world. "The matter is concluded," he said, taking his seat at the table. "Without a weapon." I said, "Without drama," Wolfe added. "And without blood," I said. Wolfe lifted an eyebrow. "Blood is frequently overrated." I smiled into my glass. Cold did most of the work. "Yes," Wolfe agreed, "but it also left behind what cold always leaves behind." "What's that?" I asked. He picked up his napkin, precise as ever. "Evidence, if one knows where to look." Outside, the city thawed. People slipped less carefully. Water ran where ice had ruled. Life resumed its usual indifference to cleverness and cruelty alike. Inside, Nero Wolfe ate his lunch, satisfied. The truth had survived the winter, and even murder, it seemed, could not stop the thaw.